Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video I'd like to discuss the recent Tory hypocrisy over Brexit. They keep complaining that if we let Labour in, they're going to do deals with the EU, and they're not for the first time. In the last week, the Conservative government have announced a new deal with the EU themselves. And I know politics is often a tricky dicky, but is anything they ever do consistent? But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel. So the Brexiteers have been a little bit of a spin this week. They keep complaining about Labour wanting to do deals with the EU. That is just the reality of living next door to someone. It is particularly the reality of living next door to a massive trading bloc. I mean, seriously, how did they imagine that the relationship would go between an island and the third largest market in the world? Even the Tories are having to be pragmatic and do deals. The latest is the Frontex agreement. Rishi Sunak boasted about a reduction in small boat crossings last year. He hadn't reduced them to zero as promised, and as they were in operational terms just a few years ago. But they had reduced. Oh, we've reduced them by a third. And there were a couple of factors in this reduction. The first was poor weather over much of the summer months, making crossings more difficult. The second was agreeing a returns policy with Albania. Naturally, although the government didn't try to hide this agreement as such, they were not shouting it from the rooftops because it was a policy which meant coming to an international agreement in compliance with international law rather than releasing the hounds. The Tories much prefer release the hounds policies. I don't know if you've noticed. It's just that they don't work. So instead, it's like they have two policies for everything. They have the one that they do quietly that will sort of actually have a positive impact. And then they have their release the hounds policy. And they shout about the release the hounds policies. And then they're very quiet on the sensible policy. And they go, oh, look, it worked. The release the hounds worked. So, because they're trying to link it with the impacts of actually something else. But that was last year. If they're going to give themselves the option of an autumn election this year, they need to make sure that channel crossings do not increase this year, because if they're going to increase, it'll be over summer when we find this out. They don't want that just before the election. The Rwanda safety bill is their big release the hounds policy, but that will do nothing. So behind the scenes, the UK and EU have signed a deal to work more closely on dealing with the criminal gangs. This is not a returns policy as such. It's dealing with criminal gangs involved in people smuggling. It won't, of course, stop the boats, but if more progress is made in dealing with criminal gangs, it may reduce numbers. It will certainly keep a lid on numbers if it works. Being clear, the way to actually deal with the criminal gangs is to take away demand for their services. If safe asylum routes are set up, then genuine asylum seekers have no need of people smugglers into Britain. Now, I don't know if this agreement will have that much impact on channel crossing numbers. What I do know is that if it does, the government will claim it's the Rwanda plan which has done it. After all, that is their wedge issue. Labour are in favour of cooperating with the EU in tackling criminal gangs, amongst other things. They are not in favour of the Rwanda plan. So the Tories need to claim that it's the plan which Labour oppose which is successful. But this week was interesting in terms of EU cooperation. So we had this agreement on tackling criminal gangs and genuinely illegal immigration. The Tory press weren't much interested. But then we had a report that EU officials privately expect to see some significant movement on UK-EU trade friction when the trade and cooperation agreement comes up for negotiation in 2026. Now, I know some of you have read reports that, oh, the EU is not interested in renegotiating the deal and only wants to rubber stamp its continuation. It is, after all, what they've said publicly. At the time, I countered that there was a reason the EU wanted the deal to be renegotiated in 2026. It meant that the UK would definitely have had a general election, another general election, and that the government which formed after it, whether Labour or the Conservatives, might be taking a much more pragmatic approach to things by then. So the EU set that date because they expected some movement. Now, nobody is saying the entire deal is going to be junked and begun again from scratch. We're not talking about a complete renegotiation. But it was also never going to be a token review and rubber stamping either. What would be the point? Because if you can review it at any time you like. And if you think there are any tweaks needed, and both sides agree that, you don't need to set a date in the future. You just do it as and when. We saw this with the Northern Ireland Protocol. But anyway, the point is that there are now reports that EU officials expect some significant movement on several sectors of the economy, those where there is mutual benefit in lowering trade barriers. Now, nobody is suggesting, least of all me, that the EU are going to do us any favours out of pity. What will be agreed will be what is mutually beneficial. It's just that there is plenty of mutually beneficial change to be proposed. The fact that the spectre of another Trump presidency is giving some urgency to the need to unite Europe once more is also helpful, though. Mind you, by 2026, everyone will know how that has turned out. It's also worth noting that a new EU Commission will be formed later this year. So there'll be no hang-ups amongst the individuals dealing with the political leadership on both sides. So if anyone on either side has said, they've been turned off by either members of the current EU Commission or members of the current UK government, they go away. It will also be before France have another opportunity to elect a far-right nutter, although if you guys could keep not doing that, that'd be great. I mean, maybe persuade parties on the left to work together a little bit better to head her off. But I digress. The reaction in Tory town was quite spectacular. Tory MPs and shills in the media, as well as other assorted gobshites, all came out of the woodwork, dramatically claiming they were right. We told you Labour wanted to do deals with the EU, they said. They never made any secret of this. Also, you guys have been doing deals all the time with them, often shit deals, but deals nonetheless. We just had this latest one with Frontex on the people smuggling operations. And even then, the Tories, when they felt the need to justify it, have said, oh, but we're not adopting any EU laws. No, we're not accepting migrants from the EU or anything like that. So, and that's where they are. They're really limited in the deals they can agree with the EU because it still has to fit within some sort of Brexit mindset. But rage as they will, I think more of the British public are realising that leaving the EU did not fulfil their promises. Polling suggests as much. For many, it has made things worse. I do not think the Telegraph or the Mail are going to succeed in turning voters away from the idea of a Labour government negotiating improvements to our trade terms at all. In fact, I think Brexiteers in the Tory party and client media have never really grasped just what changed in terms of perceptions in 2022. It was a huge year for Brexit. We first had Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, not only harming supply chains, but also raising massive security fears. With the US unreliable on the matter, due to the golfing attitude between Democrats and Republicans at the moment, it's obvious that Europe has to be able to defend itself. And it can only do so by working together. Putin, who did so much to push for Brexit, has arguably not just made working closely with the EU easier, but necessary. And the second event in 2022 was Liz Truss blowing a hole in the government's budget, which the Tories chose to plug by squeezing ordinary households even more, whilst allowing massive corporations to make hugely increased profits. Both of these events were serious blows to Brexit, and I don't think some of the more prominent Brexiteers have quite grasped this. And because of that, their arguments are increasingly out of step with public opinion. After the election, Labour are going to be working closely with the EU. They made no secret of that. The EU are keen for talks on security matters. We are keen for talks on trade matters. And both sides are keen on strengthening and uniting Europe once again against the myriad common threats facing us. Putin, the climate emergency, massive levels of displacement of people, because Europe's got to deal with the refugees, and the orange one, literally the four horsemen of the apocalypse. The Tories are going to rage at it. They're going to call it a betrayal. I do not think they're going to be winning over voters by doing so. And if Labour can deliver not just tangible benefits, but obviously tangible benefits to closer cooperation in their first term, because it won't happen overnight, but in their first term, the Tories are going to be trapped between a choice of continuing to argue for a lower standard of living, because that's how people will then see it, or having to completely U-turn on their attitudes to the EU at least, if not Brexit itself. But there we are. Those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. Hope you found the video interesting. If you did, please click the like button. And if you'd like to support the channel further, the join button for memberships. And until next time, I'll see you later.